My sister didn't wait for the candles or the blessing. She stood up at Dad's birthday dinner, lifted her glass, and said she was the only one with bank access loud enough to turn every head sharp enough to slice the room in half. No whisper, no hesitation. And everyone smiled like her brag was something to be proud of. Dad didn't. His hand shook barely, but I saw it. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I just held the weight of the bank's earlier call and realized our family was seconds from breaking open. Tell me, what would you have done, May? My name is Rose, and the strange thing about growing up in my family is how easily you can disappear, even while sitting at the same dinner table. Everyone talks, everyone laughs, but somehow your voice slips between the cracks before anyone hears it. That's how it's always been between me and Emily. She fills the room and I steady it. She performs, and I make sure the pieces behind her don't fall apart. People assume I'm quiet because I'm shy. The truth is quieter than that. I learned early that in our house, harmony mattered more than honesty. If Emily glowed, we all pretended the light was warm. If Mom insisted things were fine, we acted like they were. And if Dad hesitated or forgot something, we looked away so he wouldn't feel embarrassed. It was easier than confronting the truth. Still, Dad and I had our own kind of rhythm. He'd call me when numbers confused him, or when a payment reminder popped up on his phone and he wasn't sure if he'd already handled it. I never made a big deal out of it. I'd just stop by after work, help him sort through a small stack of envelopes, drink tea in that old Denver kitchen, and leave before anyone labeled it favoritism. In our family, even kindness had to be quiet. But sometime last fall, I began noticing moments when Dad's certainty slipped. Not dramatic episodes, just a pause too long, a forgotten detail he would have nailed before a question repeated shortly after being answered. When I tried mentioning it to Mom, she brushed my hand and said, "He's tired, Rose. Don't start worrying." Emily echoed the same thing. If Emily decided it wasn't a problem, suddenly it wasn't allowed to be. Then the bank called. I was reviewing budgets at the office, surrounded by the familiar hum of printers and low conversations, when a representative asked if I could verify recent activity on Dad's account. At first, I thought it was a routine check. Then she described the withdrawals, several large amounts spaced too close together, and asked whether Dad had approved an additional card request linked to his account. When she told me the request came from someone in the family, I didn't need her to finish the sentence. I asked for time to look into it. She agreed. The call ended, but the weight of it didn't. I planned to speak to Dad privately before his birthday. I rehearsed how I'd bring it up gently without making him feel cornered. I even wrote the questions down, folded them into my planner like a small promise to myself. But life rarely gives you the perfect moment you hope for. His birthday dinner arrived faster than I expected, with candles and laughter and relatives who believed everything was still whole. And Emily, of course it had to be Emily, chose that night to declare exactly how much power she believed she had. Dad's birthday dinner took place at a small restaurant in Denver, the kind with warm lighting and old brick walls that made every celebration feel more intimate than it really was. By the time I arrived, half the family had already gathered, coats slung over chairs, silverware clinking, someone asking the waiter about dessert before we'd even ordered entrees. Everything looked perfectly normal, which somehow made the knot in my chest tighten. The bank's call still pulsed behind my ribs, but I tried to shove it aside long enough to let Dad enjoy his evening. He looked good that night. A little tired, yes. His shoulders held a heaviness I didn't remember from past birthdays, but his smile was genuine when he hugged me. He asked if I'd remembered to bring the candles he liked. I had. I always did. It was one of those tiny details he counted on me for, the kind no one else ever noticed until it went missing. Emily breezed in 15 minutes late, wearing a sparkly dress that made everyone turn to look at her. She apologized dramatically, as though she'd come straight from saving the world, and Mom clasped her hands like she was greeting royalty. The difference between how they welcomed her and how they greeted me was subtle but sharp enough to leave marks. I wasn't angry, just reminded. During appetizers, conversations circled around vacations, work stories, and whatever home projects people imagined they'd get around to someday. Dad laughed a few times, but I caught the moments when his eyes drifted, searching for a thread he'd lost. When he leaned toward me and asked what we'd just been talking about, something simple like Emily's new side table, I answered quietly, hoping no one noticed. Mom noticed enough to frown at me, not at the situation. Then the shift happened. Emily tapped her glass with her fork, 3 light chimes that silenced the entire room. She stood up, smiling like she'd been waiting her whole life for this cue. "I want to make a little toast," she announced, placing a hand on Dad's shoulder as though she'd always been the one carrying him. Dad looked up at her, puzzled but polite. Emily lifted her glass higher. "Most of you know I've been helping Dad with his finances lately." A few relatives nodded. Mom even murmured something appreciative. Emily continued, her voice bright and proud. "And now I'm the only one with bank access. So no worries, Dad's completely taken care of." The room reacted exactly the way she wanted. Smiles, soft laughter, a few raised glasses, the kind of approval that always seemed to fall into her lap. But Dad didn't smile. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and something inside my chest cracked. Everyone smiled, and none of them had any idea what those words meant. Not really. They didn't hear the uncertainty in Dad's voice when he'd asked me last month how to check a balance he'd already checked. They didn't hear the bank representative questioning unusual withdrawals. They didn't see the paperwork Dad had signed naming me the second safety contact. But I saw all of it playing behind my eyes like a warning. Emily basked in her moment. Mom dabbed her eyes like she'd been moved. And I sat there, pulse steadying into something cold and clear. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. The applause after Emily's toast faded quickly, swallowed by the restaurant's soft music and the clatter of plates being cleared. But the silence between Dad and me lingered thick enough to taste. He avoided my eyes, studying the wrinkles in his napkin like they might offer him a way out of the moment. I knew that look, not confusion exactly, but the fear of it. The fear of not remembering what everyone else insisted he had agreed to. When dinner ended, people lingered near the door, hugging, laughing, promising to do this more often, though we all knew we wouldn't. Emily soaked up every compliment like sunlight. She didn't glance at me once. Maybe she thought I was too insignificant to threaten her version of the story. Or maybe she'd already decided Dad's account was hers to manage consequences, be damned. Outside, the Denver air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. I wrapped my coat tighter and waited while Dad slowly made his way toward me. Mom hovered beside him, smiling too brightly, as if her expression alone could hold the entire family together. "You didn't say much tonight," she said. Her tone wasn't curious, just edged enough to warn me not to stir anything. "I didn't have much to say," I replied. And that was true. Not yet. Emily finally stepped outside, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Thanks again for tonight," she told Dad, looping her arm through his. "I'll swing by tomorrow to sort out the rest of the paperwork." Dad stiffened. It was small, but I felt it like a vibration under the ground. "What paperwork?" he asked. I watched a flicker of irritation cross Emily's face before she replaced it with a soft smile. "Don't worry about it, Dad. You already signed everything." "Signed what?" he repeated. Mom interrupted quickly. "He's tired. Let's not make him go through details now." But I couldn't ignore the unease curling through me. Dad's uncertainty wasn't a one-off moment anymore. It was becoming a pattern, and Emily was counting on it. She needed him confused, needed him quiet, needed everyone else believing she was simply helping. I walked them to their car, promising I'd stop by the next day. Mom looked relieved, like she expected me to smooth over whatever tension remained. Emily didn't look relieved. She looked annoyed. She didn't like when I was involved, especially in things she wanted to control. When I got home, I turned on the smallest lamp in my living room, the one that cast a warm circle over the coffee table. I pulled out the folder Dad kept in his drawer, policies, statements, payment logs, and spread them across the table. It didn't take long to find the inconsistencies. Withdrawals too close together, notes in Dad's handwriting that didn't sound like him, a request form with Emily's signature where his should have been. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was strangely calm, like my mind had already decided something before I consciously realized it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, and patterns break only when someone refuses to look away. I leaned back, staring at the papers lit by the soft lamp, and felt something inside me settle. The truth needed a place to land, and it wasn't going to wait another day. The next day felt strangely quiet, like the hours were holding their breath. I drove to Dad's house just before noon, half expecting Emily's car to already be in the driveway. It wasn't. The absence should have comforted me, but instead it made my pulse tap faster. Emily loved getting ahead of me. If she hadn't shown up yet, it meant she was planning something bigger than a head start. Dad answered the door slowly, leaning heavier on the frame than usual. His eyes lit up when he saw me, but there was tiredness there too, like he'd wrestled with thoughts he couldn't untangle. Inside, the morning light fell across the kitchen table where a half-finished cup of tea cooled beside his glasses. He gestured for me to sit, rubbing his forehead as he lowered himself into the chair opposite me. "Rose," he said, "did we talk about something yesterday I can't quite remember?" My heart squeezed. Not because he forgot, but because he knew he forgot. That awareness was a wound in itself. I kept my voice soft. "We didn't really get the chance to talk, Dad, but we need to now." Before I could continue, a car door slammed outside. Emily's heels clicked up the walkway. Mom followed her, carrying a folder thick enough to make my jaw tighten. They walked in without waiting to be invited the way people do when they're convinced they belong more than you do. Emily's smile was too bright. Perfect timing. I brought the rest of the documents Dad needs to finalize. Finalize what Dad asked, eyebrows pulling together. She ignored the question. Mom didn't even look in my direction. I rose slowly. "We're not signing anything today." Emily turned toward me, her expression flattening. "This doesn't concern you, Rose. It concerns Dad," I said calmly, "and the bank." The room snapped to attention. Emily froze mid-step. Mom stopped rustling the papers. Dad looked from one face to another, unsettled by the sudden shift. "What are you talking about?" Emily demanded. I reached into my bag and placed the printed statements on the table, withdrawal notes, the attempted request for a secondary card. Dad stared at them as if they were written in another language. "I got a call," I said, keeping my voice steady. "They flagged these payments. They thought something might be wrong." Mom bristled. "You should have come to us first." "I was going to," I answered. "But last night changed things," Emily scoffed. "Oh, please." "Because of a toast, you're so dramatic. You said you had full bank access," I replied. "In front of everyone." "Because I do," she shot back. Dad's gaze whipped to her. "Since when?" Emily faltered. "Just slightly, but enough to reveal the crack. Dad, we talked about this. You said I could help. You signed the forms." He shook his head slowly. "I don't remember that." Mom stepped in quickly, too quickly. "Honey, you were tired that day. Let's not make this bigger than it is." But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Emily, and she was losing her grip. "I'm the one the bank called," I said, "because Dad listed me as his safety contact. They needed to confirm whether someone in the family was withdrawing large amounts on his behalf." Emily's voice rose sharp as broken glass. "Are you accusing me of stealing? I'm asking you to explain," I said. Her face flushed. "This is ridiculous." I took a breath and turned to Dad. "Did you authorize these payments?" "All of them." His confusion was painful to witness. I thought I did. Or maybe... He rubbed his temples. "I don't know anymore," Emily pounced. "See? He forgets things, Rose. That's why I'm helping." "No," I said quietly. "That's why you're taking advantage." The silence that followed was thick and electric. Mom inhaled sharply. Emily's jaw dropped open, her voice exploding into a pitch I'd never heard from her. Called about what? It was the same tone she'd used the night before, but this time there was no audience to charm, just truth, cornering her from all directions. "About irregular activity," I answered. "About a request for a card in your name. About withdrawals Dad didn't confirm." Dad stared at Emily, eyes wide with something close to fear. "Emily, did you do that?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I was just trying to make things easier. You've been overwhelmed." "Mom said I didn't tell you to take money," Mom snapped, but her voice wavered. I lifted the final piece of paper. "This is the request for the additional card. The signature is yours, not Dad's." Emily lunged for the paper. I pulled it back. Dad stood slowly, palms pressing against the table for balance. "Emily, you forged my name." "That's not what happened," she said, voice cracking. I filled it out because you said I didn't say that." He whispered, I wouldn't. His shoulders shook. Not from anger, from the horror of realizing someone he trusted had used his confusion as cover. Emily tried another tactic. Dad, please, I was helping. I've always helped. No, he said, trembling. Rose has always helped. Those words didn't feel victorious. They felt heavy, like grief rearranging its weight. Emily backed away, eyes darting between all of us, searching for the old family choreography that always placed me in the background and her in the spotlight. But the script had changed, and she knew it. Give me your keys, Dad said suddenly. Emily blinked. What, the house keys? And the bank documents? Everything. You can't be serious. But he was. He held out his hand. It shook, but not from hesitation. When she didn't move, he turned to me. Call the bank, Rose. Tell them I want all access revoked except yours, and ask them to investigate the rest. Mom gasped. Emily's face went slate white. You're choosing her over me, she choked out. I'm choosing the truth, Dad said. And the truth is, I don't trust you right now. Emily covered her mouth with her hand, breathing hard. You'll regret this. Dad shook his head. I already regret what I didn't see. She stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the hinges. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dad turned to me, eyes glassy. I'm sorry, Rose. I should have listened. I should have noticed. I took his hand gently. You trusted the wrong person. It happens. What matters is what we do now. He nodded, sinking into his chair. And for the first time in years, the house felt honest. Broken, yes, but honest. The bank moved fast once Dad made the call. By the next morning, they confirmed all access linked to Emily had been revoked. An internal review began, and for the first time in months, Dad looked like he could breathe. The weight pressing on his shoulders eased, replaced by something fragile but real clarity. He asked me to sit with him while he sorted through the remaining paperwork, his hands steadying each time I guided him through a line or reminded him of a detail he'd forgotten. Mom drifted in and out of the room, quieter than usual, her confidence shaken by how quickly the truth had unraveled. She didn't defend Emily anymore. She didn't blame me either. She just seemed smaller, like she finally understood how easily loyalty can blind you. Emily didn't come by the house. She sent one short message to Dad, nothing angry, nothing apologetic, just a clipped line saying she needed space. He read it twice, folded the phone face down and whispered, "Space is good." In the quiet that followed, I felt something shift. Not triumph, not revenge, just the steady thrum of a family beginning to rebuild on ground that no longer tilted beneath our feet. In the weeks that followed, Dad and I settled into a new rhythm, slower, gentler, honest in a way our family hadn't been in years. We didn't talk much about what happened with Emily. Some wounds don't need retelling to be understood. But he trusted me fully now, and that trust felt like the beginning of something steadier than forgiveness. If you've ever had to protect someone you love from the people closest to them, tell me your story in the comments. And stay with me, there are more stories coming.